right, we are back. Gaston, before we get into the conversation, can you please tell us about a challenger brand that you're passionate about right now and why?
There's so many. I love so many brands in so many different categories. But there is one that is particularly quite maybe unknown in the UK. And I love it because it's a very traditional brand that managed to reinvent itself in the current kind of like DNA. And it's a brand from my home country. I'm originally from Argentina. I am from Patagonia. And there is a beautiful brand called Havana. I'm not sure if anyone here knows alfajores, but alfajores is our kind of like biscuit. There is a company that has over 100 years. It's called Havana. It's from a small sea town. And it was always very traditional. And in the last few years, it had to reinvent itself. And what I love is that they decided to reinvent themselves and like challenge other brands by going back to their roots, by going back to who they are. So they launched a new edition of their alfajores, which actually is produced with sea salt from the sea town where like the brand started. And I love this idea of challenging doesn't necessarily mean reinventing or disrupting everything. Sometimes it means going back to your roots. And that brand actually, through that collection of alfajores and a lot of other things, it became one of the most successful brands in Latin America. Their turnover is like booming, but I think it has a lot to do with authenticity and really going back to who you are, not necessarily reinventing everything. Challenging is also knowing who you are and being confident to go back to that root.
I mean, I would argue it's more than sometimes going back to your roots. I think it's almost always kind of going back to your roots, right? Because at the end of the day, if effective marketing is bridging the gap between the value of the product or the brand, in this case, and what it stands for, and the needs that exist in the market for the customer, oftentimes that's not coming up with something new. It can just be kind of clearing away all the confusion and bureaucracy and gray that gets in the way of like the black and white and how you actually connect those. So I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that if we look at an example of like 10 incumbent brands that have kind of reinvented themselves as a challenger, a lot of them would probably follow that pattern.
Completely, yes, and especially when you innovate as well. Currently with Oddbox, we're creating new products that go beyond fruit and veg. Some of them I can, of course, disclose. Like we have launched a market, for example, of refillable items. So we're selling lots of different products, but only using paper bags, no plastic, really fighting waste beyond fruit and veg, kind of like food waste. But with all these new products, we always go back to who we are and what we stand for. And every single decision, it goes back to that decision-making process. It's really how can we challenge a category with our personality, with what makes Oddbox really unique.
Love it. All right, well, that's a great segue. So I'm guessing most people here have heard of Oddbox. For those that haven't, or maybe those that need an update on where the business and the brand is today, what is the state of the union of Oddbox right now?
What's getting me excited about Oddbox in general?
Where is it at? Give people kind of an update on where the business is right now.
Yeah, so I think most of you, when I say Oddbox, what do you know about Oddbox? Usually the first thing that people say is, oh, wonky fruit and veg. And yes, we're definitely wonky cucumbers, and we're so proud of having like these curvy aubergines. And currently we're even doing a campaign that is all about how sexy our fruit and veg is. So we're very proud of being a fruit and veg company, and particularly what we stand for, what Oddbox has always been about, is really rescuing food that should never go to waste. I think in our case, it's not that we're rescuing things that would go to waste because they're lower quality. The quality is actually sometimes even better. It's much fresher. It's actually going direct from farm to your house. So all our customers say, oh, how delicious it is. Actually, the taste is incredible. How someone could even throw away this stuff. So we always go back to really incredible quality when it comes to fruit and veg, but we are now expanding beyond it because we know that people use our vegetables to cook meals, and meals go beyond vegetables, it goes beyond fruits. So we're also thinking, for example, how can we make sure that we bring our food waste mission to categories like proteins? How can we, for example, serve lentils and maybe even eggs and bakery, all these other food categories that are incredibly important to our customers? How can we also fulfill those needs with a very Oddbox mentality? So that's what's next. That's where we are at. We have been growing quite well when it comes to fruit and veg, but we want to expand beyond it to bring our food waste mission across the whole food industry.
Amazing. So we got 3 chapters to the conversation today. We're going to talk, which is a particular passion point of mine, about the category convention that you and Oddbox have challenged and how you think about that. We're going to talk about storytelling, which I think is interesting because it probably gets mentioned many times at a conference like this, but actually you come from a creative writing background. So you actually get into what are the skills and tactics of creative writers that can be applied to brands and marketing. And then we're going to talk about, force multipliers, which I thought was a really interesting kind of phrase that you used in our prep call, because I think everybody here, whether you're at a big company or a small company, everybody's trying to do more with less, being forced in many cases to do more with less when it comes to marketing. So we're going to learn about some of your kind of tips and tricks for how to punch above your weight in a category. So starting with the category convention. So obviously you are in a very crowded category when it comes to meal delivery, when it comes to grocery delivery. You're kind of tapping into a couple categories that have a lot of businesses in them, a lot of VC money going into them, a lot of advertising happening right now. How have you thought about the category convention that you're challenging, and how does that flow into the decisions that you make for marketing at Oddbox?
So the first thing I do whenever I join a new company, and in my case at Oddbox, I'm currently almost 1 year in the role, and I think it has been already an incredible brand for a long time. I think really Oddbox got it right from day one. They knew that they had to do something disruptive, because when it comes to fruit and vegetables, it's quite a commodity in the end, right? Like, I think it's not something that necessarily you can create an amazing brand unless you really focus on telling a story behind that commodity, which is fruit and vegetables. But the first thing I do when it comes to joining a category or a company that is already operating a category is list all the conventions from the fruit and veg category. In my case, for example, most fruit and vegetable companies, they focus on perfect produce. If you look at like most of the photography from companies like M&S, Waitrose, even some of the smaller brands like Natura, they always focus on this idea of perfection. So I list literally in my notebook all the rules of that category. Like, people use perfect photography. People, for example, they really, in general, most brands in the fruit and veg category, they try to focus a lot on the quality of the fruit and veg, but not necessarily tell the story behind that specific origin or that specific tomato that you're eating. So I list all those rules, and then I work with my team to go against all those rules. It's literally like, okay, if everyone is joining like this kind of like category with an idea of perfection, let's actually embrace the imperfection of our fruit and vegetables. And even our customers are doing, like, when I speak to our customer happiness team, it's amazing. Like, the photos we get from our customers, one of them, for example, was obsessed with making cucumbers look like birds. So it was just literally like sending us pictures of like these cucumbers, all of them looking like beautiful types of birds, like the most incredible collection of like cucumber birds that you could ever imagine. And rather than shying away from it, it was like, let's make this actually a series on our Instagram. Let's show a collection of like cucumber birds done by one of our customers. So really it's about, I think like that would be my encouragement to all of you. Try to note down everything that is a must in your category, and then systematically go against each one of those rules. That's the only way you're going to stand out.
It's something that we do actually when we're working with our clients on brand strategy, positioning work, even actually looking at kind of cultural trends within a category. And it's actually something that I think people can take away from this conversation and like do differently. That's something I'm always trying to get out of this is, the talks are of course great, but hopefully people can walk out of this session and actually do something differently with how they're approaching marketing. I think that's definitely one. Sitting down and actually going through the exercise of mapping the category convention. And that could be as simple as just kind of printing out the ads of the incumbents in your category, putting them on a wall and saying, what are the patterns, what are the trends, where's the white space? Or it could be, a little bit more kind of deeper research. But at the end of the day, if differentiation drives preference, which I would argue, let me know if you disagree, because you have to be different in order to be preferred. If you're the same as everybody else, then why would somebody choose you? You have to stand out. And so I think starting from a place of, you of course have to go inside out. How can we be authentic? What are we all about? But you also have to go outside in, because at the end of the day, people are viewing you within a category, not just independently.
Completely.
All right, so talking about storytelling, and I will say, of course, you came on our podcast a little while ago. It's been something that's kind of gone through my head because, like I said, we talk about storytelling or brands as storytellers, marketers as storytellers all the time, but I think there's very few of us that have actually learned the skill of being a journalist or being a creative writer. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background in that space? I know you spent some time at Google, YouTube, kind of honing these skills and applying them to marketing, and now, of course, at Oddbox. What's your background? How do you think about creative writing? What's the importance of it to brand storytelling?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting story in itself. So I'm going to probably deviate a bit from your question, just to tell a bit like how did I get into marketing and how I think about marketing and creative writing as part of marketing. And then I'm going to answer the part of your question about like basically how creative writing can really influence marketing storytelling. So I never thought I would work in marketing. And in fact, when I studied at uni, I am originally from Argentina, and I was studying at university communications, which is a quite common degree, I think, like if you want to go into marketing. But I intentionally said, I'm not going to do marketing. Like, it's just not my vibe. I took one course, and it felt so kind of like flat compared to everything else I was doing. It was all these formulas, like the 4 Ps and like the 3 As, and like I was like, God, like it's just like so flat. Like it can't be more complex than this. But then suddenly I did all the interviews for starting an internship at Google, and the recruiter told me, you're 100% marketing. You should definitely do an internship in marketing. I almost took it as an insult. I'm not going to do this. Like, I really want to do communications. I don't want to do marketing. But then I said, let's give it a go. Let's see how marketing is actually in practice. And I ended up loving it. I ended up loving how marketing combines creativity and numbers and analytics. And I found that actually what is wrong with marketing is the way that we teach marketing, not necessarily what we do as marketeers. But then when I was at Google, I found quite interesting that all the time, and it's not just at Google, I think in most companies, all the time we talk about stories. And particularly I was at YouTube, and there was this big crisis at YouTube. You probably remember, some of you, a few years ago, there was a big PR crisis because suddenly lots of brands found that they were advertising against terrorist content on YouTube, which was, of course, not the idea of the platform, and it was a big crisis for the company. So at that point, I was thinking, I want to rewrite the story of YouTube. And I pitched it to my manager, who was leading YouTube marketing in the UK. I pitched what Hemingway would say about the YouTube story. So I brought a lot of learnings from writing, particularly from Hemingway, into storytelling for the YouTube brand. And I actually took most of those learnings from a master's I was doing at the same time in creative writing at Oxford. And in that master's, what I found that it was really interesting is that whenever we talk about stories, we always started with a conflict. What's the conflict that really we want to focus on to get people's attention? But in marketing, we never started with a conflict. It was always about what's the key message? What's the key message that we want to land? And it felt really different to the way that stories are usually told by writers or by screenwriters, because in the end, if you want someone to pay attention to your message, the most important thing that you need to focus on is making sure the conflict is really present in it. As human beings, we're wired to pay attention to conflict. Somehow, though, as marketeers, we try to avoid the conflict, we try to avoid that tension to focus on a very clear message, but clarity sometimes goes against really grabbing people's attention. So that was one of my first learnings, and then I explored lots of other things. I created a deck that when I was within Google, it was called like the 10 rules that Hemingway would tell any marketeer, and then I started using it to really improve the story of YouTube. And now I bring it to every single brand that I work for. So yes, if you don't like Hemingway, I'm sorry, because I'm going to be obsessed about all the learnings that you can bring from him. But it's not just Hemingway. I think like really read more fiction, watch more movies, because they're going to help you tell better stories, much more than any marketing book that you can read.
So I obviously want to hear about how you've applied that to Oddbox, but the thing I'll jump in and say quickly is it brings to mind for me, I think, we always talk about people ignoring advertising, people don't like ads. I don't think people don't like advertising, I just think they don't like shitty content. And a lot of advertising is shitty content. But if it's good, people don't really care where it comes from. So if you can create a Hemingway-esque piece as a brand, I think people will spend time on it. And maybe my continuation of my mini rant, if you'll grant me another second on this, the whole conversation about shorter attention spans, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I don't think that maybe our brain chemistry has changed that much in the 10 years. I just think people have a lot of other options for content to consume, so they don't have to spend time watching bad ads if they don't want to. People will consume good content if it's good, is what I would say. But given that background, given kind of some of these principles that you're taking into marketing, how have you applied that to Oddbox?
So one of the first campaigns I worked with my team when I joined, and it was really a campaign that we worked very much in collaboration with everyone in the company, was around vegetables that you hate. So the opposite of what you would expect, right? Like if you're a company that focuses on fruit and vegetables, the most obvious route would be like, let's do a campaign about vegetables that you love. But it feels flat, right? Like, we all love vegetables, but also what is really interesting is that there's lots of people who hate and like properly hate certain vegetables. At the same time, we were launching this new product feature at Oddbox where you could swap any vegetables in your box for anything else that you want. So we know that lots of our customers, they love Oddbox, but at the same time they were like, I hate aubergines, I want to change them for cauliflowers. So we knew that allowing people to swap vegetables and fruits was key. So we launched that product feature, but the way we launched it was in a very Oddbox way. What it meant is that we focus on vegetables that you hate. So we asked our community, please tell us which vegetables you hate and why. We got the most amazing responses. Like one person told us, I hate celery because it tastes like sadness. Like literally, it was like that level of poetry. We had someone writing a poem of hate to artichokes and how much she hated artichokes and why she hated artichokes. Mushrooms, oh my God, like people hate mushrooms. There was so much hate for them, which I don't understand because I absolutely love mushrooms, but it seems like it's a vegetable that nobody likes. So what we did is like really took all that inspiration from our community, and then we created hypnosis videos to try to convince them that actually, with that hypnosis video, you might start liking mushrooms. So we created hypnosis videos, we showed them to our community, but unfortunately they didn't work, nothing happened. And what that means is that, don't worry, because you can still change your mushrooms for anything else you want, thanks to Pick Your Own, our new feature on Oddbox. So that was one example of how we actually leaned into conflict. Rather than shying away from what can go wrong, it's actually the way that you can get people's attention, how you can actually get them excited about a new product feature. Do not just try to make it like plain, flat, the obvious route. Try to go for the unexpected, and that's going to get way more passion from everyone in your community.
So we have a few minutes left. I know we have one question, but before we get there, chapter 3 was going to be talking about force multipliers and how do you punch above your weight when everybody's budget and everybody's time is limited. What are some of the kind of biggest recommendations or advice that you'd have with people on force multipliers for challenger marketing?
I think it all comes from a place of confidence. I think as a challenger brand or as a small brand, it's very easy to think that because you're small, you need to think small. And one thing I always challenge myself and also challenge my team to think about is what would we do if we were 10 times the size that we currently are? Even when it comes to inviting speakers, like every 3 months I invite a speaker to basically join us in our marketing team meetings and give us some inspiration. I always go for like really big names. And sometimes I'm even scared of like messaging like some of the people I invite. Like I invited, for example, like the CEO of like Tony's. And I'm like, he will never say yes. Like there's not gonna be a way that, that person will say yes. But sometimes you find that actually by being confident and thinking big, you manage to achieve really big things. Even with targets, when I joined Oddbox, I was quite new, and I was quite scared to set like more ambitious goals for my team, and I decided to do it. I was like, let's set like that ambitious goal, because in the end, if we manage to achieve it, it's going to be way more rewarding than just setting for something that is like average. And in the end, you know that you achieve it because it was actually not that ambitious like to start with. And thankfully, it was achieved, that target, which means that I'm still at Oddbox. But I feel like it was more of that mentality of like, when you're in a challenger brand, the only way that you can succeed is by thinking big. And I feel like that's probably going to be like your competitive edge and your force multiplier. Being small doesn't mean thinking small. If anything, you have way more power because you are small to move at speed and achieve much bigger things.
Love it. All right.
Floor. Just making sure there's not another one. No, one question. So wonky is just as beneficial as non-wonky. It's the same stuff that you're putting in your mouth. So how do you go about educating audiences on nutritional value versus what it looks like, or is it not important?
It's a really good question, and thank you so much for asking it. When it comes to customer education, which I know is a phrase that we use a lot in marketing, right? Like, we need to educate our audiences. I always challenge back, especially my team, and especially other teams, because I always think that actually most audiences, they don't want to be educated. Like, we don't want to be educated in general. Like, when we're out of university, we're like, enough. I don't want any more education. I think what people want is inspiration. What we want is being inspired. So when it comes to nutritional value, for example, I never think, how am I going to educate my audience about nutritional value? What we do quite a lot is inspire them. Inspire them to think, for example, what can you do with a cauliflower? So if you look at our recipes, of course, all the food that we provide is very healthy in itself because it's fruit and vegetables, and there's nothing healthier than eating fruit and vegetables. But what a lot of people find challenging is that they don't know what to do with fruit and vegetables. They don't know how to cook something that is as tasty as some of the ultra-processed food that we eat. So my role as a brand is to inspire them, to make them think that actually an aubergine can be as exciting as the most incredible meal that they ever had. So all the time, we're trying to bring the idea of taste. Rather than nutritional value, it's really taste. And I feel like from that taste, actually, the nutritional value will come anyways.
Yeah, so you empower them.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Exactly.
what you can do with it. That was so wonderful. Thank you so much, Gaston and Eric.
Thank you so much.